morning my son-in-law told me I needed to make an appointment to visit my own grandchildren. I was standing on his front porch in Oakville, holding a bag of maple sugar cookies I'd driven 40 minutes to bring over. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just come from my Tuesday coffee with my old work friend Gerald at the Tim Hortons on Kerr Street. I do that every week, have done for 3 years since I retired from the engineering firm. It keeps me sane, keeps me feeling like I still belong somewhere in this world. I knocked on the door, and Nathan answered. He didn't open it all the way. Just stood there in the gap, one hand on the frame, looking at me the way you'd look at a neighbor you don't particularly like but have to be polite to. "Walter," he said. Not Dad, not even Mr. Bryn, just Walter, like I was a contractor who'd shown up on the wrong day. "I brought cookies for the kids," I said. "Thought I'd say hello to Sophie and the boys." He looked at the bag, then back at me. "You should have called first." I actually laughed. Not a ha-ha laugh. More the kind that slips out when something is so absurd your body doesn't know what else to do. "Nathan, I've been coming to this house since before you put the first piece of furniture in it. Things have changed," he said. "Serena likes to keep the schedule consistent. For the kids." Serena, my daughter. 34 years old, mother of my 3 grandchildren, and apparently now operating her family's visit schedule like a corporate HR department. I drove home to my place in Burlington that day, with the cookies still in the passenger seat. I didn't even play the radio. I just drove and thought about all the years I'd spent making sure that family had what they needed, and I tried to understand how I had ended up on the wrong side of my own daughter's front door. Let me go back, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. My wife, Carol, passed away from cancer 11 years ago. Sophie was 23 at the time, just starting out. We'd always been close, the 3 of us, Carol, Sophie, and me. After Carol died, Sophie and I leaned on each other. She'd come over for Sunday dinners, we'd watch the Leafs games together. She was my person, and I like to think I was hers. Then she met Nathan at a work conference in Toronto. He was in finance, polished, confident in a way that could read as either impressive or arrogant depending on your mood. I tried to see the impressive side. I really did. For Sophie's sake. They got married in 2016 at a vineyard outside Niagara-on-the-Lake. I paid for the wedding, not because they asked me to. I offered. Carol and I had been saving for Sophie's wedding since she was small, and I wasn't going to let that money sit in an account collecting dust when my daughter was getting married. It was $62,000. I wrote the check without a moment's hesitation. They moved into a rental in Mississauga after the wedding. A year later, Sophie got pregnant with twins, Owen and Liam. The rental was too small. They started looking at houses and quickly discovered what anyone trying to buy a home in the GTA discovers, which is that the numbers simply do not work for a young couple, no matter how good their salaries are. I had the equity. I'd been in my Burlington house for 28 years, paid it off years ago, and I had substantial savings from the engineering firm. Carol and I had always planned to help Sophie get into a home. That hadn't changed just because Carol was gone. So I co-signed the mortgage on a 4-bedroom detached in Oakville. More than that, I put in $200,000 as a down payment to bring their monthly carrying costs down to something manageable. The house was listed at $940,000. It was a beautiful home, quiet street, good schools, a backyard with a deck, and a maple tree that Owen and Liam would eventually climb every single day. I told Sophie one thing. "This is your home. I'm not here to interfere. I just want you and the kids to be comfortable." And I meant it. For a long time, I kept that promise exactly. I was good at being the quiet grandfather. I'd come over Saturday mornings with groceries when they were stretched thin after parental leave. I'd take the boys to their hockey practices when Nathan was traveling for work, which, in those early years, was often. I helped them renovate the basement so they'd have a proper family room. I paid the contractor, sourced the materials, managed the whole project, never once asked for a thank you. When Sophie got pregnant again with their daughter Nora, they needed a minivan. Their bank account was sitting at nearly zero. Buying the house, furnishing it, and the cost of raising twins had wiped them out. I co-signed the vehicle loan and covered the first year of payments. $4,800. I didn't track it in a ledger. That's not the kind of father I am. What I didn't see What I was too close to see was what was happening to Sophie in those years. Nathan's family had money, old Hamilton money, the kind that comes with opinions about how things should be done. His mother, Pauline, was one of those women who made you feel, very quietly and very consistently, like everything you did was slightly inadequate. She had strong views about child rearing, about household management, about what a proper family looked like. And over the years, those views seeped into my daughter the way cold air seeps under a door. Slowly, imperceptibly, until one day you realize the whole room has changed temperature. Nathan started making small comments. At first, they were so minor I didn't register them as a pattern. "Walter, you don't need to come every Saturday. Sophie's got it handled." Or, "We're trying to give the boys a more structured routine." Or once, when I showed up with a bag of used hockey equipment I'd found at a yard sale for Owen, "We prefer to buy the boys new things." I should have paid more attention to those comments. The real shift happened when Nora was about 18 months old. Sophie started canceling our Sunday dinners. Once, twice, then it became the default. I'd suggest coming over and she'd say they were busy, or the kids were tired, or Nathan's parents were visiting. I told myself it was just the chaos of 3 small children. I told myself she'd find her way back. But there's a particular silence that settles in when someone is withdrawing from you. And if you're honest with yourself, you can feel it. I felt it. I just didn't want to name it. Then came the spring when I found out, by accident, that Nathan's parents had been over for dinner 3 weekends in a row. I heard about it from my old neighbor Patricia, who is close with someone on Sophie's street. I sat with that information for a long time before I let myself feel what it meant. I called Sophie. I kept my voice steady, which took more effort than I'd like to admit. "I feel like I've been drifting to the outside," I said. "I'm not asking for anything dramatic. I just miss being part of things." There was a pause. Then Sophie said, "Dad, Nathan and I need to set some boundaries. We want to parent the way we want to parent." I asked her what that meant in practical terms. She said Nathan had felt, for a while, that my involvement was too much, that I came over too often, that the boys were getting confused about who made the decisions in the house, and that they needed more space to function as a family unit. I didn't argue. I said I understood, and that I would step back. I did step back. I stopped coming on Saturdays. I stopped calling midweek. I went from seeing my grandchildren nearly every week to once a month, then less. I waited to be invited. Mostly I wasn't. I kept paying though. The mortgage payment I'd helped structure was still running. The vehicle loan had rolled over into a new one. Sophie had asked me to co-sign again when they traded in the minivan for a newer model. I'd said yes. Of course I'd said yes. She was my daughter. That was my failure, I think, in hindsight. Not that I gave too much. I don't believe in measuring love in dollars. But I continued to give financially, while accepting less and less of a relationship in return. I told myself I was being generous. What I was actually doing was making myself easier to dismiss, because people rarely have to reckon with what they're losing until the support stops. The Tuesday on the porch was in March. 2 weeks later, Sophie called me. I thought, when I saw her name on my phone, that maybe something had shifted. Maybe the porch moment had shaken something loose in her too. It hadn't. She called to tell me that she and Nathan were planning a trip, a family vacation. Just the 5 of them, plus Nathan's parents and his sister's family. They were going to Hawaii for 10 days over the kids' spring break. She mentioned it almost in passing, like she was reporting a weather forecast. "That sounds wonderful," I said. "The boys must be excited." "They're thrilled," she said. And then, after a brief pause, "We're going to need to pause the mortgage support while we're away. There are a lot of expenses with the trip." I went very still. "What do you mean by pause?" I said. "Just skip April's contribution. We'll get back on track in May. We have some cash flow timing issues with the flights and the resort deposit." I asked her what resort. She named one. I looked it up after we hung up. It was a 5-star resort on Maui. The base rate for a family suite was over $1,000 a night. I sat at my kitchen table in Burlington for a very long time after that call. My name was still on the mortgage. My credit was still attached to that house. My $200,000 was the reason they'd been able to buy it in the first place. And I was being told, by phone, that I'd be skipping my contribution. Not because of hardship, but because of a luxury vacation I wasn't invited on. I want to be clear about something. The money was never the point. I never needed the gratitude, never needed to be repaid. What I needed, what any parent needs, is simply to be regarded, to be treated as a person who matters, not as a utility that gets switched off when it's inconvenient and switched back on when it's needed again. That night I called my brother Frank in Guelph. Frank is 4 years older than me, plain-spoken, and has never once in his life told me what I wanted to hear when what I needed was the truth. I told him everything, the porch, the years of stepping back, the Hawaii call. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walter, you've been paying for a relationship that stopped existing 2 years ago. What are you still waiting for?" I didn't sleep that night. I lay there in the house Carol and I had shared for 28 years, and I thought about her. Carol would have known what to do. She was wiser than me in the ways that counted. She could read people. She could name things I couldn't. I tried to think about what she would say. I think she would have said, "You have loved Sophie with everything you have, and that will never stop. But love doesn't require you to participate in your own disappearance." I made my decisions quietly over the following 3 weeks. I didn't tell Sophie. I didn't confront Nathan. I'd spent enough years in engineering to know that you don't announce structural changes before you've completed the drawings. First, I spoke to my financial advisor, a steady, practical woman named Brenda, who had managed my accounts since before Carol died. I told her I needed to restructure. We went through everything: the mortgage arrangement, the vehicle loan co-signature, the regular transfers I'd been sending to Sophie's account. On the mortgage, my contribution had been structured as a gift loan, which meant legally I had no obligation to continue it. Brenda connected me with my lawyer, a man named Patrick, in downtown Burlington, and we reviewed the documentation carefully. My $200,000 in original down payment was gone. It had gifted without condition, and I made peace with that. But the ongoing monthly contribution, the co-signature exposure, all of that could be unwound with proper notice. I gave written notice to the mortgage lender that I was removing myself as co-signatory after the current term. It required their cooperation and Sophie and Nathan's awareness. But it started the process. I sent Sophie a formal letter, not an email, a letter, because some things deserve paper, informing her that my financial support would be ending on June 1st. I wrote it in plain language, without anger, without a list of grievances. I simply said that given the changes in our relationship over the past several years, I felt it was the right time for her household to stand fully on its own, and that I wished them well. I also contacted the vehicle lender. The loan was near the end of its term anyway. I was not going to be renewing my co-signature. Then I turned to my own situation, which I realized I had been neglecting for years while I focused on everyone else's. I called a realtor, not to sell my Burlington house. I love that house. Carol's garden is still out back, and I'm not ready to let go of it. But I had a small investment property, a condo unit in Hamilton, that I'd bought years ago and had been renting out. I'd been thinking for a while about liquidating it and doing something more meaningful with the equity. I decided the time had come. I also booked a trip, not to Hawaii. I booked 3 weeks in Newfoundland for August, a place I'd always wanted to go and had always put off, always had a reason to stay close to home. I booked a rental car, a series of small inns along the coast, a whale-watching excursion out of Trinity Bay. I sat at my computer and booked the whole thing in one evening, and when I was finished, I felt something I hadn't felt in longer than I could clearly remember. I felt like a person with a future. Sophie received my letter on a Thursday. I know this because she called me on a Friday morning, early, before 8, and she was not calm. "Dad, what is this?" Her voice was high and tight, the way it gets when she's frightened, which I recognized even through the anger. You can't do this to us." "I can," I said. "And I should have done it sooner. Not to punish you, Sophie, because it was the right thing. We have 3 kids. We have a mortgage. Do you understand what you're doing?" "I understand exactly what I'm doing," I said. "What I need you to understand is what you have been doing. For years now." There was a silence. Long enough that I thought she might hang up. "I've been your father," I said. "Not just financially. I've been present. I've been available. I have shown up in every way I know how. And over the last few years I have been made to feel like an inconvenience in my own family. I stood on your porch in March holding cookies for my grandchildren, and your husband talked to me like I was a stranger. I don't accept that, and I'm not going to fund a life that has no room for me in it." She started to cry. I won't pretend that was easy to hear. Sophie has been the most important person in my life since the day she was born, and her crying has always cost me something. But I also knew, Frank's voice in my head, Carol's quiet wisdom somewhere underneath, that her tears in that moment were partly grief and partly shock, and that shock is sometimes exactly what is needed. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "I am always going to be your father. That is never going to change. But I need to be your father in a real sense, present, included, valued. Not a signature on a document that you call when you need something." She didn't know what to say to that. We ended the call without resolution. I wasn't surprised. I knew this wasn't going to fix in one morning. In May, I sold the Hamilton condo. The equity after fees came to just under $190,000. I gave $40,000 to my brother's daughter, my niece, who is a nurse in Guelph and has been quietly struggling since her divorce. I gave another $30,000 to a housing charity I'd been following for years, one that helps families in the Hamilton region. The rest I moved into my retirement account and a modest income fund. It felt, I have to tell you, extraordinarily good, not because of the money itself, but because for the first time in years I was making decisions based entirely on what I actually valued, not on what I thought would keep the peace or keep people close. I went to Newfoundland in August, 3 weeks. I drove the Viking Trail up the Great Northern Peninsula and stood at the tip of the island, looking out at the Labrador Sea. I ate fish and chips wrapped in paper at a picnic table in Twillingate. I sat in a small church in Trinity on a Sunday morning and listened to a choir that made my chest ache in the best possible way. I called Frank from a headland outside Bonavista and we talked for an hour about nothing in particular, the way brothers can. I did not call Sophie while I was away. For the first time in my adult life, I took a holiday without checking whether anyone needed anything from me. It was lonely, some days. I won't romanticize it. There were evenings when I sat on inn porches and watched families together, fathers with their grown children, grandparents with little ones running around, and I felt the absence keenly. But lonely and empty are not the same thing. I was lonely with a full heart. That's a different thing entirely. Sophie reached out in September. A text, first. Short, careful, like she was feeling for solid ground. "Dad, would you want to come for Thanksgiving?" I thought about it for a full day before I replied. Not because I didn't want to go, because I needed to be honest about what I was willing to walk back into. I replied, "I would love that. I need it to be different than it's been, though. I need Nathan to be respectful, and I need to see my grandchildren without it being a scheduled event. If that works for all of you, I'm there." She took 2 days to respond. Then, we talked. He understands. "Please come." I went. Nathan met me at the door, the same porch. He shook my hand and looked me in the eye and said, "Walter, I owe you an apology. I wasn't fair to you." It wasn't a long speech, it wasn't emotional, but it was direct, and I found that direct is worth more than elaborate. Owen and Liam came running from the kitchen and hit me at about hip height, one on each side. Nora, who is 4 now and has Carol's eyes, held up her arms to be picked up. I stood there in the hallway of that house with my 3 grandchildren hanging off me, and I thought, This is what the last $200,000 was for, not the mortgage. This. Thanksgiving dinner was quieter than it used to be. We're rebuilding, not restoring. Those are different projects. Sophie and I talked, really talked, for the first time in years. After the boys were in bed, and Nathan was in the kitchen cleaning up, she sat next to me on the couch and said, "I think I got lost for a while, Dad. I'm sorry." I put my arm around her the way I used to when she was small. "I know," I said. "I watched it happen and I didn't know how to reach you. I tried the wrong way for too long. The financial stuff scared me," she said. "When your letter came, I was so angry. I know that too. But it also," she stopped, looked at her hands. "It made me see things. About what we'd been doing, what Nathan and I had been doing. I don't think we even noticed until it stopped." That is the part that I want anyone listening to hear. Not the dramatic part. Not the part where I made the calls and changed the documents. That was just logistics. The real part is this. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop absorbing their disregard. Not out of spite, not for revenge. Because as long as you keep absorbing it, you're also protecting them from having to see it, and they cannot change what they cannot see. I am 63 years old. I have a good life in Burlington. I have Frank in Guelph and coffee, with Gerald on Tuesdays. And Carol's garden still comes up every June. I have my grandchildren back, really back, and a daughter who is finding her way toward me again across terrain that we both helped make difficult. I am not bitter. I want to be clear about that. I don't carry the years of distance as a wound. I carry them as information. Information about what I will and won't accept. About what real presence looks like versus the shape of it. About the difference between being generous and being used. Carol always said that the best relationships are the ones where both people feel lucky. I think she was right. I'm working on building that at 63 with what I have left. Some days it feels late. Most days it feels exactly on time.